Alaric, the king of the Visigoths, is best remembered for sacking Rome in 410. This pivotal event marked a significant milestone in the decline of the Western Roman Empire. However, Alaric's legacy is also tied to a fascinating mystery: the fate of the vast treasure he reportedly looted during his sacking of Rome. Alaric's rise to prominence occurred during a tumultuous period for the Roman Empire. By the late 4th century, the empire was split into eastern and western halves, both grappling with internal strife and external threats. Alaric initially served as a Roman military leader, but dissatisfaction with his treatment led him to rebel and assume leadership of the Visigoths. In 408, Alaric invaded Italy and laid siege to Rome multiple times, pressuring the city to pay large ransoms. The final siege in 410 culminated in the sacking of the city, an event that shocked the ancient world. Alaric's forces looted gold, silver, precious stones, and religious artifacts, including treasures from the Temple of Jerusalem, which had been brought to Rome after the fall of Jerusalem. Shortly after his conquest, Alaric died unexpectedly near Cosenza in southern Italy. According to legend, his followers buried him along with the treasure in the bed of the Busento River, temporarily diverting the water to conceal the grave. The workers who performed the burial were reportedly slain to ensure the secrecy of the location. The mystery of Alaric's treasure has inspired numerous theories ranging from plausible to somewhat fantastical. The most enduring theory is that Alaric and his treasure remain buried beneath the Busento River in Cosenza. While no substantial archaeological evidence has surfaced, the story persists in local lore. In recent years, Italian archaeologists and historians have proposed excavations near the river, but these efforts have yet to yield definitive results. Some scholars suggest that the treasure may have been hidden in the nearby Sila Mountains. The rugged terrain would have provided a secure location for the Visigoths to stash their loot, and the dense forest could have obscured the treasure's whereabouts for millennia. It's also plausible that the treasure was largely dispersed upon Alaric's death. The Visigoths faced constant challenges, including battles, migrations, and political upheaval. The treasure could have been used to fund these endeavors, gradually disappearing into the economies of the regions they occupied. If the treasure does remain, at this point the best chance of uncovering it is through the use of ground-penetrating radar technology. The story of the Pied Piper of Hamelin is among the most enduring and enigmatic legends of medieval Europe. It's said that in 1284, a mysterious stranger arrived in Hamelin, Germany, and used his magic pipe to first rid the town of rats. When the townspeople refused to pay him for his services, he then lured away the children from the town. While this legend has been told in stories and fairy tales, it also has a grounding in historical records that reference the sudden disappearance of Hamelin's children. Historically, the earliest known written reference to this event in Hamelin appears on a church window dating back to around 1300. This window reportedly depicted a piper leading a group of children out of the town. Unfortunately, this window was destroyed in 1660, and what we know of it comes only from older accounts. Other evidence includes a 14th century entry in the town's chronicles that reads, "It is 100 years since our children left," as well as references in various medieval manuscripts. Though these sources are fragmentary, they indicate that something significant indeed happened to Hamelin's children. The question that still dogs historians is simple: what actually took place? One popular theory, and arguably the one most tied to the fairy tale element, involves literal rat infestation. In the commonly told version of the story, rats invaded the town, causing destruction, disease, and panic. A colorfully dressed piper arrived, offered to get rid of the pests for a modest sum, and successfully led the rats to drown in a local river by playing his flute. When the townspeople refused to pay him, He sought revenge by doing the same with their children, leading them away, never to return. However, some historians point out that the earliest versions of the tale don't even mention rats, suggesting that the rat infestation may have been a later embellishment. This first mention of rats wasn't added in surviving texts until the 16th century, 3 centuries after the purported event. Now, of course, here I have to mention that this could just be survivorship bias in the source material. There may well have been earlier texts that mentioned the rats, but these texts may now be lost. It's also possible that the rat element was added to dramatize the story or give a moral lesson on keeping one's promises. After all, without the rat element, the lesson of keeping your word to those who assist you is completely lost, and instead it becomes a narrative about not trusting strangers or outsiders. Another explanation theorizes that the children's disappearance could have been tied to disease, particularly the plague. In the Middle Ages, outbreaks of plague were frequent, claiming countless lives and often displacing communities. Some historians argue that the children the piper took away might refer metaphorically to those who died, or those who fled Hamelin during an epidemic. In this theory, the Pied Piper is a symbolic figure representing death. While compelling, this interpretation doesn't perfectly account for the specificity of the date, 1284, or the details about a single event that removed only the town's children. A separate theory suggests that the children left Hamelin in a mass migration, or children's crusade. Historians note that during the Middle Ages, there were instances of large groups leaving their hometowns en masse in search of better opportunities or in response to religious fervor. The Pied Piper, in this interpretation, could be a recruiter or locator from Eastern Europe, beckoning laborers or colonists. Indeed, parts of Eastern Europe were being resettled en masse by Germans at that time, a process known as Ostsiedlung. If this were the case, the Piper might have been a charismatic figure who convinced young people to start new lives elsewhere. Over time, the legend may have turned him into a mystical figure who spirited them away. Yet another perspective links the disappearance of the children to a possible military campaign. During the period in question, territorial conflicts were common, and mercenaries sometimes passed through towns promising wealth or glory to eager youths. Some scholars suggest that children could refer not only to those who were minors, but to younger adults who chose to follow a recruiter onto a battlefield or into another region. Under this theory, they may have been involved in a mass casualty event on a battlefield somewhere, leading to an entire generation of Hamelin youth being wiped out. And to put things in perspective, the town only had about 2,500 inhabitants around the year 1700. Though we don't have data for Hamelin's population in the 13th century, it may have been substantially less. Under this theory, then, a generation of youth could be as little as a few dozen boys going off to war and being eliminated or simply never returning. The Brothers Grimm helped immortalize the Pied Piper story in their collection of German legends, first published in the early 19th century. Their retelling solidified many of the details that we associate with it today: the bright clothing, the magic pipe, and the tragic betrayal by the townspeople. While their rendition is by no means a faithful historical record, it did capture the essence of local lore and passed it on to wider audiences. Yamashita's treasure refers to a legendary hoard of gold, precious stones, and other valuable artifacts that were looted by the Imperial Japanese Army across Southeast Asia. Many people believe these spoils were hidden in underground tunnels, caves, or other secret locations in the Philippines, under the command of General Tomoyuki Yamashita. The legend begins with the Imperial Japanese Army's systematic looting of gold, artwork, and other valuable resources in territories they occupied during the war. Japan's rapid expansion into China, the Philippines, and other parts of Southeast Asia led to the accumulation of large amounts of ill-gotten gains. It's often claimed that the war loot, stolen from banks, temples, churches, and private collections, was transported to the Philippines, allegedly due to its strategic location. According to popular lore, General Yamashita oversaw the concealment of this loot in a series of secret tunnels and bunkers carved into the rugged landscapes of the archipelago. General Yamashita was a highly respected officer in the Imperial Japanese Army who led successful campaigns in Malaya and Singapore. By the time he was tasked with defending the Philippines against Allied forces, Japan's fortunes in the war were in decline. There's no doubt that Yamashita was in the Philippines, but historians disagree on whether he personally supervised the hiding of looted valuables. Some insist he was too preoccupied with military matters to organize such an ambitious operation. Still, no reliable documentation has surfaced to prove that these caches were ever set up. After World War II ended, rumors about hidden Japanese loot began circulating in the Philippines almost immediately, leading to something of a mass hysteria about it. Local treasure hunters and foreign adventurers alike became fascinated by the idea of gold bars and gemstones stashed away in remote jungle caves. In the decades following the war, occasional finds were reported in newspapers, only to be dismissed upon further investigation. Perhaps the most famous case involved a Filipino locksmith named Rogelio Roxas. Roxas claimed, in 1971, to have discovered part of Yamashita's treasure, including a golden Buddha statue filled with gems. The subsequent controversy involved accusations of theft, the intervention of powerful political figures, and a lengthy court battle. Ferdinand Marcos, who ran the country as a dictatorship for a large part of his 20-year rule, is alleged to have sent government goons to confiscate the statue. However, his involvement in Yamashita's treasure allegedly goes much deeper than this. Some accounts assert that Marcos used his intelligence and military connections to locate portions of the rumored gold. Critics contend that he allegedly laundered or sold precious metal overseas, funding both personal and political ambitions. However, no concrete evidence has been presented to conclusively tie any part of Marcos's vast wealth to Yamashita's alleged hoard. Whether the treasure exists or not is still open for debate. However, I have to speculate that most individuals, on finding such treasure, would keep very quiet about it. The Sessho-seki, or killing stone, is an artifact in Japanese culture, intertwining history, mythology, and natural phenomena. The legend of the Sessho-seki centers around Tamamo no Mae, a beautiful and intelligent woman who served as a courtesan in the imperial court during the reign of Emperor Toba. Unbeknownst to many, she wasn't actually a human, but the clever disguise of a malevolent nine-tailed fox spirit known as a kitsune. Nine-tailed fox spirits represent the most powerful of these trickster spirits in traditional Japanese religion. According to the myth, Tamamo no Mae used her charm and wit to captivate the emperor, causing him to fall gravely ill. Court astrologers eventually discovered her true identity, leading to her fleeing into the wilderness. There she was ultimately slain, and her malevolent spirit transformed into the Sessho-seki, an evil rock and object of fear. The stone was believed to emit poisonous gases, killing anyone who approached it, thus earning its ominous name. In early March 2022, visitors to the site of the Sessho-seki discovered that the stone had split into two nearly equal parts. Some feared that the splitting of the stone signified the release of the fox spirit, potentially bringing misfortune. However, geological experts and local authorities suggested that natural weathering processes were the likely cause of the stone's fracture. Over time, exposure to the elements, including rain and temperature fluctuations, can create cracks in rocks. In the case of the Sessho-seki, water may have seeped into existing fissures, and during colder periods, the water could freeze and expand, exacerbating the cracks until the stone split. To err on the side of caution, the local government had Shinto priests sent out to appease and cleanse the ancient fox spirit, and thankfully, after March 2022, all was well in the world. The Plague of Athens, which broke out during the second year of the Peloponnesian War in 429 BC, stands as one of the most devastating epidemics to hit the ancient Greek world. It emerged in a city already under tremendous strain from a protracted conflict with Sparta, and it proceeded to kill a substantial portion of the Athenian population, including many of its leaders. As the disease ran rampant through the overcrowded city, it not only shattered the social fabric of Athens, but also dealt a crippling blow to the city's military and political fortunes. Prior to the outbreak, Athens and Sparta had been locked in a bitter struggle, with Athens relying on its naval power and the security of its fortified city walls to fend off Spartan land forces. With the countryside left abandoned so that the population could take refuge behind the city's walls, Athens had become extremely densely crowded. Poor sanitary conditions, coupled with the influx of refugees, created an ideal breeding ground for disease. It's not surprising that when the plague struck, it spread rapidly. Simply put, the city of Athens was a tinderbox, and the plague was the match that set it all ablaze. The timing was disastrous. The Athenians were banking on their strong naval presence to supply the city, so the Spartan army's ravaging of the surrounding farmland didn't force a capitulation. Yet, instead of famine or enemy swords, a microscopic foe made the city buckle. Thucydides, the great Athenian general and historian, documented the plague extensively in his work, History of the Peloponnesian War. He didn't just record political and military developments, he also carefully described the symptoms and social consequences of the outbreak. Many historians and physicians have turned to Thucydides' account in an attempt to identify the plague's exact cause. According to him, victims suffered sudden severe fever, redness, and inflammation of the eyes, and a bloody throat and tongue. They developed foul breath, violent sneezing, and coughing, followed by chest pain and severe gastrointestinal problems. Thucydides noted that those who survived often lost their fingers, toes, or eyesight, and became immune if exposed again. Such detailed observations, while invaluable, haven't provided a definitive answer for what this plague actually was. Over the centuries, suggestions have ranged from typhus to typhoid fever, smallpox, measles, or even hemorrhagic fever. Modern DNA analysis has helped narrow some possibilities. In 1994, excavations of a mass grave in the Kerameikos Cemetery in Athens uncovered teeth that were tested for pathogens. Scholars thought they had found genetic evidence pointing to typhoid fever, but subsequent analysis led to controversy, and no unanimous conclusion has been reached. The debate continues, reflecting just how challenging it can be to retroactively diagnose an ancient disease based on historical descriptions and incomplete archaeological evidence. Still, the leading hypothesis for many researchers remains typhoid fever, which is consistent with Thucydides' descriptions, especially given the sanitary conditions in besieged Athens. What isn't in doubt is the scale of the disaster. Estimates vary, but it's believed that the plague killed anywhere from 1/4 to 1/3 of the city's population. This had profound social and political repercussions. Athens had relied extremely heavily on its navy and on its democratic institutions. With so many citizens and rowers either dead or weakened, not only did the city's military capabilities suffer, but public morale plummeted. Ancient sources recount the breakdown of traditional religious and social norms. Many Athenians believed their gods had abandoned them, while according to Thucydides, others used the chaos as an opportunity to plunder and pursue personal gain. One of the most notable casualties of the plague was the great statesman Pericles. Under his leadership, Athens had flourished, building monumental structures like the Parthenon and achieving a golden age of philosophy, drama, and democracy. Pericles was also the architect of Athens' grand strategy in the Peloponnesian War. He chose to bring the countryside's inhabitants into the city and let Sparta ravage the land, rather than engage directly in a land battle that played to Spartan strengths. While this strategy may have been sound in purely military terms, it inadvertently created the conditions that facilitated the spread of the plague. His death not only deprived the city of a visionary leader, but also thrust Athens into a leadership crisis. Subsequent leaders couldn't match Pericles' prestige or political skill, and the city's policy became more erratic, contributing to internal divisions and ill-fated military ventures. The psychological toll was also immense. Thucydides described an atmosphere of fear and fatalism, as many believed death was inevitable once symptoms appeared. Funeral rites became impossible to carry out as usual, and bodies were thrown onto pyres, or left unburied in many cases. Notably, traditional Greek religion centered on proper burial rites to honor the dead and maintain favor with the gods. The inability to perform these rites shook people's faith and cultural identity, leaving them feeling untethered from the values and rituals that had long defined their community. In terms of historical significance, the Plague of Athens can't be overlooked as a turning point in the Peloponnesian War. Initially, Athens had enjoyed a strategic advantage. Its walls and navy provided security and allowed for a focus on maritime power. However, after the plague, the morale and manpower of the city were severely diminished. Although the war dragged on for decades after, Athens never fully recovered the confidence and cohesion it had shown in the war's early years. The Plague of Athens also contributed to a change in ethical thinking at the time. Athens was, as you may know, a great intellectual and cultural center of the ancient world. Faced with mass mortality and the breakdown of norms, people began to question the justness of the gods and the reliability of traditional moral codes. Thucydides noted a collapse of law and order, as those who believed they had little time left tried to enjoy every pleasure before succumbing to illness. This crisis of faith and ethics paved the way for philosophical inquiries that would dominate Greek thought for centuries to come. The Sophists, for instance, emerged with skepticism toward traditional values. In turn, thinkers like Socrates grappled with defining virtue in a world where conventional morality seemed to fail so easily.